We're here with the Life and Law podcast. We have a special guest, Mary Bagnashi's with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mary.
Thank you, Theodora. It's God's timing, you know.
Definitely. So would you like to start by just giving a brief introduction about yourself?
Okay, thank you. I'm 62 years old, and I became 100% disabled on November 24th, 2010. The Torrington, Connecticut police assault and battery. They mobbed me with 25 to 30 police officers in retaliation for my what is now over 22 years of complex litigation out of Connecticut involving my housing authority of the city of Torrington, and they're also considered to be a HUD public housing authority, government corruption whistleblower activity. And once I filed 2003, a Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities duly filed EEOC discrimination complaint. The retaliation was immense, immediate, and I had no outlet, including Ask Me. I was a union employee, union member, and for 6.5 years. And I'll tell you, if you see something and you have the courage and the moral fortitude to say something, you might as well kiss your life goodbye in the city of Torrington and state of Connecticut. And that's due to the public employee unions and the Bar Association. They own this state, and they own basically, they have an illegal monopoly control over the entire administration of city, county, state, federal government. Every branch is manipulated by the Bar Association and public employee unions. They're strangling, so I'm really happy that President Trump and Doge is stepping up and trying to eliminate some of this fraud, waste, and abuse. And I hope that they will jump onto my whistleblower activity, because I'd like to have a meeting and get my years of documentation of HUD government corruption, how deep it is. It's state to state. They will stalk you state to state. They will do everything they can and have to me once I came forward and started filing formal civil and criminal complaints, which I'm a big mouth. I haven't stopped filing formal criminal and civil complaints all the way to DC, because, that's our duty, first off. And they can throw me in prison, which they have. York Correctional, doing hard time several times. Connecticut Valley Hospital Institution and psych wards, they label you. And really, it's a hate crime, because they give you a diagnosis and then they use it against you. If you internet search my name, you can read all about it. I have 2 YouTube channels and a Facebook page, so anybody that's interested in finding out more about what this is all about, they can contact me or research my name. But thank you, Theodora. I hope that's a nutshell version.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So just to kind of break it down a little bit. So how long have you, how many years were you living in Torrington?
I actually moved to Torrington in 1977 from El Paso, Texas, where I grew up until my sophomore year of high school. My parents were from Torrington, and so were my grandparents. And when I moved here in 77, I graduated from Torrington High School. I went to Northwestern Community College. Eventually, I ended up getting an associate's degree and a UConn bachelor's degree. And I worked in the field of human and social services, starting basically in 88. And my specialty was in housing and developing and managing affordable and subsidized low-income housing. And that's where I ended up working at the housing authority of the city of Torrington. Well, I did buy my own home, by the way, in Torrington on Clearview Avenue in 1995. And I got a down payment assistance loan through Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. And this is a part of my whistleblower corruption story, because HUD, FHA, and Connecticut Housing Finance Authority rubber stamped approved by the State Department of Banking. They're stealing thousands of HUD sponsored homes. If you look up Connecticut Housing Finance Authority on the ct.gov JUD case lookup under Civil Superior Court, you can find, right now they have, I think, 4,500 Connecticut Housing Finance Authority foreclosures. Now that's a quasi-public agency. Every state has a financing authority that is funded by HUD and IRS, low-income housing tax credits, and it's all fraud and corruption. And I found out early on in 2012 about the grand jury in Connecticut. And I joined lots of groups trying to get, who are trying for a long time in every state to get common law grand juries. And I've been involved in that movement since 2010. But the way the Connecticut grand jury system works is that a judge or a state attorney has to apply for a grand jury. And the reason why we don't have grand juries is in Connecticut, I found out the hard way by putting in up to a dozen motions for one probable cause hearing, evidentiary hearing, for me to present my evidence that I've been collecting literally for 22 years. Hey, look at this, judge, state attorney. Look at this corruption. Order a grand jury investigation. They won't. What they did to me, because I started seeking this all the way to the Supreme Court in 2012, they put me on a judicial watch list. And my name and
I'm sorry, I don't mean to
no,
interrupt
go ahead,
you.
please.
When you say you took it up to the Supreme Court, do you mean the Connecticut Supreme Court?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. I filed a motion. This was like the third or fourth time that I filed this particular motion in Connecticut Superior Court. And at that point, I was involved in both criminal and civil, the home foreclosure fraud case. They were both on the docket. And I filed a motion to have the cases transferred to a Connecticut grand jury investigation. And the Superior Court, they didn't even rule on it, okay? And they just dropped the charges. And I was still going for the foreclosure, but that's another story. But I still appealed it directly to the Connecticut Supreme Court. And all of this documentation is on my Facebook page and various videos. And the Supreme Court sat on the motion for 3 months. And then they made a ruling in January of 2013. And this ruling is so insane. It just shows all the in-depth fraud upon the court. And I can tell you, as far as the Supreme Court in Connecticut, Justice Andrew McDonald, he's directly involved in what has happened to me with the state attorney maliciously prosecuting me for the past 14 years on easily provable lies. Justice Andrew McDonald used to be Governor Malloy's corporation counsel when the governor was mayor of Stamford. And the city of Stamford has a housing authority. And both the governor and McDonald know that housing authority is identified by state statute and HUD federal rules of regulations as a quasi-public agency. They knew that back then. And when I contacted Governor Malloy, I wrote him a letter because that's what I do. I write letters all the way to President Obama, President Trump, senators, and then I follow up with phone calls and emails. And I've been doing this for now on this particular case, 22 years. I started it in 2003. But they put you on a judicial watch list and they start prosecuting you every year since 2010, all the way up to 2020. I had dozens of false arrests, false imprisonments, forced competency exams, thrown in CVH a couple of times. They've been looking to have me permanently placed there. And who is they? Senator Blumenthal is right behind this. Senator Chris Murphy. I have enough evidence to have both of them immediately impeached if they don't resign once this story, which it is coming forward. All of ours are. Justice is coming. Hold on, I'm going to let my dog in. but
Okay, so
several.
I'm gonna kind of stop for a second so we could try to
Okay,
make
great.
sure everybody, because I know you're saying a lot, and I know that it's kind of hard to stay focused when talking about all of this, and it might be
Sure.
confusing for people listening that aren't familiar with what's going on. So just to kind of summarize what you've said from what I heard, you're talking about how, you're from Torrington, you dealt with a lot of corruption in after you realized that there was corruption with the whole HUD, and which is, to simplify, it's like a government down payment assistance program, correct?
Well, there's two aspects of my HUD. Thank you for hearing me, by the way. That's good listening skills. And I know it's important to have everybody kind of try to follow the story. I worked for the Housing Authority of the City of Torrington for 6.5 years. And that's when my corruption story began. The HUD foreclosure fraud didn't come into play until 2012. And that's after I became disabled when the police assault and battered me, and they've been assault and battering me and ever since, throwing me in prison. It's
But
horrendous what they've
you're
done to
but
me.
you
But
used this program to purchase your home, correct?
yes, I received,
And
yeah.
in
Mhm.
in this program, you received a down payment assistance.
Yeah, and yes, I received $3,000 down payment assistance from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority in 1995. I bought a house for
And
90 grand. Okay.
and
And
what were the conditions of that? Was it a forgivable loan? Was it with interest? What were the terms?
sure, CHFA, they partner with private banks, and I've got McHugh Mortgage for the first loan. Both of the loans were 30 years, 6% fixed interest. So CHFA, they lure first-time home buyers into down payment assistance loans. They don't tell the buyer that once they sign that paper for the 3 grand or whatever they borrow from CHFA, that CHFA and the original first lender, the private lender that puts up in my case, 88 grand, 30 years, 6% mortgage. And CHFA took over the down payment. They don't tell you when they file these documents with the city that they did a little switcheroo. McHugh, the main lender, becomes the servicer for both, not even for both loans, just for the 88 grand. They become the servicer of the loan, and CHFA holds the note. Okay. And that means that if that note is valued during its 30-year period, let's just say for easy circumstances, that note is valued at $1 million. What the state of Connecticut does, and all of the other state housing finance authorities do, is they put that $1 million note in their asset column. And what that does, and they also, by the way, that investment goes into ultimately paying judges and retirees. You know how the state pension fund is underfunded, unfunded, grossly criminally mismanaged. They're stealing as many homes as they can and equity because the note to those loans, in the case of CHFA, are tied to the pension funds. I haven't completely figured it out where I can, maybe other people have. And actually, that's a good thing for me to be able to put a plug into, Theodora. There's a group of people that have been fighting this mortgage and foreclosure fraud throughout the country, and they're real heavy hitter whistleblowers, certified whistleblowers. And there's a toll and roll event happening this month. They're going from California to DC. They're picking up as many people as they can. I'm on my Facebook page now. I kind of shouldn't have done that, but I wanted to look up the toll and roll because I want people to know about it. But they can go to my Facebook page and it's open and public, and the links are right there. But how do I get back into this thing now? I shouldn't have gotten out of this because now I don't know how to get back in.
You just have to go back to the browser with Google Meet.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Interesting.
But I just kind of want to make sure, just for like the timeline, that I'm understanding kind of like so you got this, you got the house by getting this down payment loan. And then what was the agreement? Was it forgivable, or was it just a loan
No.
with a low interest?
It's a low, well, they 6% fixed interest on both loans at the time in 95 was marginally lower than, I mean, just hardly lower than the standard rate, but that was how they, yes. And you have to pay it back. You pay it back at 6% for 30 years, the $3,000 and the 88 grand.
So basically, did you have to be low income to qualify? Did you have to purchase only in certain cities? Like, what were the terms to qualify?
Great. Yeah, that's a good question. At the time, it's basically low to middle income, not low income, but low to middle income earners and first-time home buyers. And there wasn't any restrictions on anything other than what a private lender would cap you out at the amount that you could borrow. In my case, I bought a house, that was significantly less than what they said I could borrow. And that was McHugh. McHugh's a private lender. You deal with the private lender in the loan application, and they work quid pro quo with CHFA on these first-time home buyer. The only requirement was that we had to go through a first-time home buyer HUD-sponsored 8-week, I don't even know if it was 8, maybe it was 4 weeks, 4 sessions or something. And that is really troublesome because they don't explain to you, and I didn't find this out until the house went into foreclosure. And the only reason why the house went into foreclosure was because the police beat me up on November 24th, 2010, and I've been on Social Security disability ever since. It took them almost.
All right, let's just take a pause for a second.
On the home foreclosure fraud, you want to focus on.
I just want to kind of focus on.
Good.
So you secured this loan, you got the house, you moved in, and then lived there all these years. You paid your mortgage every month. There was no issues, correct?
Right. Yes. For 15 years, the house was in good standing.
Okay, and then after 15 years, you stopped paying your mortgage on time?
Yes, that's right.
December. So for whatever reason, you couldn't make your payments and you started to miss payments, correct?
Right. That's correct. I became disabled in November 2010, and by February 2012, well, actually it was January 2012, they filed a foreclosure because I missed the payments. That's correct. And I'm
sorry, how many payments did you miss
before
they actually filed?
It was about maybe 13 months.
So you missed over a whole entire year until they actually filed for foreclosure.
Yes, CHFA, that's right. And what happened when I got into the court, what's supposed to happen is mediation. I had the right to be reinstated in the loan in April of 2012, and I'd only been in court since January.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by you had the right to be reinstated? What does that mean?
That means that if I could come up with the 13 months and late fees of what I owed McHugh Mortgage, they had by law legally required to reinstate me in the loan. And that's what I tried to do.
Was that only in the circumstance that you paid it all in a lump sum?
Yeah, I would have had to have said here, based on my 13 months of non-payment and these late fees. You're saying I owe you X amount of dollars. Here's X amount of dollars. Okay. To
And there was
get clear.
no negotiating to make payments or a payment arrangement. It was basically pay the full amount or nothing.
Well, that's the problem. They cheated me out of the right to be reinstated. Okay. That's one of the reasons why I've wanted a
How?
grand jury. There's many aspects of fraud on that foreclosure. How? Well, okay. I go to court, and I do everything correctly in terms of pro se. Okay. And we go to a mandatory mediation. Okay. It's a state law. And I sit down with the mediator, and they were like, call 211. There's all these resources. At that point, I only owed 62 grand on the principal of a 90 grand mortgage. And the mortgage was only $850 a month. That included FHA insurance and taxes. It was affordable housing. And so this is like February, okay, 2012. I go to the mediation, call 211. I was supposed to go back the following month. They never gave me the appointment. All I got in the mail was, you didn't show up for this mediation, therefore we've pulled your right to have mediation. And I put in motion after motion begging for mediation. And then in April of 2012, I was awarded Social Security disability from an accident, November 24, 2010. They backdated it to that day. And I had enough money to be reinstated in the mortgage. But because McHugh was no longer anything but the servicer on the loan, and I didn't know that until the house went into foreclosure. And it wasn't McHugh Mortgage versus me. It was Connecticut Housing Finance Authority versus me. Because as I told you, they seized ownership or whatever of the note, which gives them the asset of $1 million that note is worth. And then
I'm sorry.
No,
Hold on.
it's okay.
Is that is them seizing ownership of the note part of the deal when you sign up?
No, you're not told that's what was so confusing to me. Because my mortgage papers, and I still have them all. Okay. And the house was foreclosed 10 years ago, but I'm still fighting it because there's no statute of limitations on fraud, and fraud voids everything. The mortgage itself was fraudulent. And I'll tell you why. Number one, I was required to go to this FHA HUD down payment assistance class, 3 or 4 classes. You learn whatever. And I also was required to have a closing attorney. Neither the classes nor CHFA, who I got the loan from, the $3,000, nor McHugh Mortgage, nobody, or my lawyer, nobody tells you that the day after you sign the loan and they file it at the city, it's not filed as McHugh holding the note. It's filed as CHFA holding the note. I didn't know that until the house went into foreclosure. And I'm like, why is this Connecticut house? I only owe them $3,000. At this point, I only owed them, $2,000, because I just kept the payment. It was like $20 a month, 6% interest. When I paid my first loan, which was less than $850, I paid both of them. You know what I mean? Every month. Okay. Rather than take the $3,000 and try to pay it off sooner. I just didn't do that. So what I owed on the CHFA loan was minimal.
I'm sorry. Did you pay both of the payments to the same person every month?
No, that's another part of the foreclosure fraud. I paid McHugh thinking that McHugh was the lender. And on the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, I paid a company that's also a nonprofit, quasi-pub, whatever you want to call it. It's called Connecticut Housing Investment Fund. Okay, so CHFA isn't even the
But
servicer
like
of their own loan.
usually like with a mortgage, you would pay it to the bank or lender every month. Are you saying that you were splitting your payment up to various
No,
entities every
no, no. The
you
first
only
loan
sent it to the bank?
here, I sent one. Okay, there were two loans. There was the first mortgage to McHugh. Okay,
Right.
I
And
paid
then
them
the
every
down
month. And then the second loan, I paid CHIF, Connecticut Housing Investment Fund. I wrote two checks for two different loans. There was the down payment assistance loan, and there was the first mortgage.
Okay.
So I made two payments every month. But
Okay, so at what
yeah,
point did they sell the
the
debt
day after,
to CHFA?
the day after. And to make matters worse, okay, they don't tell you that they sold the debt to CHFA.
Well, like if they're not telling you, then what is the lender doing with the money that you're paying them? Were they forwarding it to CHFA?
Yeah, they're the servicer of the loan. So whatever that means is, and first off, I mean, if you really look into what a loan is and a mortgage, it gets so complex. But what the state of Connecticut did to me in 2012 was they cheated me out of my legal right to not only be reinstated in the loan with McHugh, and McHugh lied. They sent a affidavit in January. I hadn't even shown up for court yet. They sent an affidavit claiming that they did everything that they were legally required to help me save my home. And at the time, and it's a HUD loan, there's all these alleged programs, the FELP program, the HELP program, and none of them help anybody but the people that are employed administering them. I went to a couple of the state attorney generals sponsored, every 3 or 4 months, they had a home foreclosure resource. You go to this auditorium and these little outfits, and all of the poor homeowners clutching their papers and their sad eyes and the desperation and going to, how can you help me? And none of them helped anybody. And if you look at all the CHFA, I actually you could do a FOIA request, ask Connecticut Housing Finance Authority how many homes they foreclosed on in a 10-year period. You'll be shocked. So
when the house foreclosed, who bought it?
It was it went to HUD. It sat vacant. They put a aluminum, a fence, not aluminum, whatever, a metal fence around the house, and it sat vacant for 3 years. And then it became a HUD home, and HUD sold it for less than what I owed on the principal.
But didn't they,
at
that time when they sold it, did they essentially sell it to themselves?
No, they
because
sold
they,
it. Yeah,
they owned
CHFA
it.
gave it to HUD. Yeah, it becomes a HUD house.
So just to be clear, just so
Yeah.
people understand,
Sure, of course.
they were only supposed to finance at what at the time was a lower interest rate, and they were only supposed to finance that lower interest rate and down payment, but instead they basically transferred the ownership of the note back to CHFA, and then because you missed a meeting that you weren't notified of, they used that as a reason to just cut you out of the whole entire foreclosure legal process. And then they ended up foreclosing on the property. Was it through strict foreclosure?
Yeah, they actually they put it on the market to be sold through what do they call those? They put up the sign and
Like a short
somebody
sale
from
or
some sort of sale, foreclosure sale. And they scheduled it that year on my birthday, August 24th, 2023. And I'd
wait,
only
what
been in.
year? Hold on. What year was it? What
Okay.
year was it?
I'm going to tell you, the house went into foreclosure in January 2022. By now, it's August
2022, or I thought you said it was 2012.
I'm sorry, 2012. I'm getting all confused on it. Yeah,
Okay.
2020. Okay. Yeah, the house went into foreclosure on 2012. And um, by
By the time
the
that it was bought, when was it sold? What date was it officially sold?
if you want to look up the address, it's 478 Clearview Avenue in Torrington, Connecticut. You can still find the history, and I'll send you, by the way, the court case, and you can take a look at it. Basically,
But was
what
it that
happened
same,
was
or did it
you
take several years?
it took 2025 is, and they sent me to prison multiple
Hold
times
on,
while
hold
I
on,
was,
hold on, wait.
yeah.
You said 2025. Hold on, you saying 2025 as in this year?
I'm sorry, I get 2015. The
Okay,
house was
so
stolen from me
just to
10
make
years
sure,
ago in
just to make sure
2015.
I'm following you, because I know
Yeah, I
that
know.
you want to
Getting
say
real.
everything, and it's. I know it makes sense in your head, but when you're saying it, it's hard to follow. So I'm just trying to make sure that we can understand. So
Yeah.
from 2012,
Yes.
when the foreclosure started, they didn't
Yes.
actually sell the property until 2015, which was 3 years later, right?
Correct.
So the
Correct.
foreclosure dragged on for 3 years. And then after the
Yes.
3 years was up, the ultimate person who purchased it through the foreclosure auction,
Yeah.
sale, whatever they did, was actually, again, good.
HUD. And then HUD had it for HUD didn't actually really buy it. It was just relinquished to HUD because they were the ones that backed that 3% loan. So it became a HUD home. Every HUD home on the market was stolen in a state court through this process
So
that I'm telling
basically
you
what
right now.
they're doing with these, so then it sounds like what they're doing is HUD was actually paying the full mortgage. When you signed with them, they didn't only give 3,000, they gave 90,000. And then that's how they were able to get the money, because then they're the lender, not, it's almost like the other lender fronted them the money and then they paid it off. And then now they own
Um,
it, kind of.
Well, it gets a little bit more complicated than that when you realize what an actual mortgage and note is. The lender, according to my documents, was McHugh Mortgage. So remains not a real mystery of how HUD ended up owning the home. It's all right from the gate. It's all, the mortgage itself is fraud and the foreclosure is fraud. It's all
Yeah, but like
fraud.
legally, I don't think they legally have to tell you, because like I had a mortgage and then immediately after I signed to refinance, they immediately sold it to another lender. And I had no knowledge or consent or
Okay.
ability to have a say in that. So like I'm pretty sure that the laws allow stuff like that. I could be wrong, but maybe you know better than I do.
Well, I think in terms of the law governing fair, it's not fair debt collection, but um, I'm not thinking right about the law that governs this, but it does. They do require lenders to be open and transparent, and especially this is a HUD FHA CHFA quasi public agency. This is massive RICO fraud throughout the country, and they have to be transparent. Look, why didn't, number one, the attorney that I hired, okay, his name is Paul Griffin. He didn't tell me, and neither did McHugh, neither did CHFA, and neither did the counseling. I went for 4 sessions of mandatory counseling. Not one of them tell you, hey, by the way, tomorrow when this is filed, McHugh becomes the servicer and CHFA is going to hold the note and end its value, meaning that they have in their coffers the appearance of having an asset worth $1 million. That increases their bond rating. That increases the amount that they can borrow. That increases the money that they pay the corrupt judges that are stealing our homes and sending us to prison. I filed for bankruptcy in 2013 to save my home on the auction block when it went up for sale on my birthday, August 24th, 2013. Okay. They wanted to put it up for sale. And a month before that, when I found out that that was the next step, once they wouldn't give me back the right for mediation or the right to be reinstated in the loan, they should have tried to work with me Don't have the AG sit there and tell you, oh, there's all these programs coming there, and even McHugh Mortgage kept telling me, we don't want your home. We don't want your home. Well, then help me save it. Do something. I mean, a mortgage of $850 a month that included at the time insurance and taxes, and you can't. It's 62 grand, and then HUD puts it on the market for like some ridiculous 34 grand. The guy buys it and flips it. The home was worth when it went to foreclosure, well over 130. I put a lot of money. I put a new roof, new siding, new windows, new furnace, finished room in the walkout basement, landscaping. 15 years I put my heart and soul in it, and they stole everything. And that's what the state of Connecticut does. And by the way, in order for them to have stolen it from me and won on this foreclosure, even though I walked into court not knowing it was a premeditated losing battle, I still possibly could have tried to have fought for it. But they kept throwing me in prison on trumped up charges. And in one court, same judges in another court, saying I'm not competent to stand trial, but I was competent enough to fight for my home for 3 years, bringing the case all the way to appellate and Supreme Court.
So before we get into all that, I just did a quick search. I just looked up really quick and just did a search saying like, describing your situation. And I said like, how is this possible? And it says like in the scenario that you described, where a borrower received a CFHA down payment assistant loan in the 90s and later discovered HUD owned the note during foreclosure. This likely occurred due to HUD's risk-sharing agreement with CHFA under Section 542C of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1992, which says that CHFA and HUD entered a 50-50 risk-sharing agreement in 1994 for multifamily loans. Under this program, CHFA originated and serviced loans while HUD provided mortgage insurance. If a loan defaulted, HUD would cover 50% of the loss, effectively making it a co-insurer. For single-family loans, HUD's FHA insurance often backed the CHFA mortgages, especially those involving down payment assistance. If the primary lender defaulted or the loan, If the primary, the live just went off, turn back on. If the primary lender defaulted or the loan failed, HUD, as the insurer, would assume ownership of the note to mitigate the losses. It says that the $3,000 down payment assistance likely came from CHFA's DAP program, which was structured as a second mortgage. However, the primary mortgage might have been issued by a third-party lender using the HUD/FHA insurance. If the primary lender sold the note to HUD's federal You still there?
That was a mistake. That was a big mistake. I'm sorry.
Okay, I don't know what happened here.
I pushed the wrong button and I accidentally exited the meeting. I'm so sorry. But you're right on top. I'm so happy that you are giving this overview to the people of how this, you did a little bit of research and came to that. Could you send me that link? Because I'd like to follow that.
Yeah, and I can send it to you. And also, like, I don't know how much you heard before you came off the call, but as I was saying, it says here that you most likely used the CHFA's DAP program, which is structured as a second mortgage, with the primary mortgage being issued by a third-party lender using HUD/FHA insurance. If the primary lender And it says if the primary lender sold the note to HUD's Federal Housing Administration, which is common if it was an FHA loan, then HUD would become the loan holder upon default. CHFA's operating guidelines require lenders to use HUD's mortgagee number when filing claims. During foreclosure, HUD, as the insurer, would pay the claim and take ownership of the property to recuperate losses. This aligns with HUD's broader role in preserving affordable housing. Loans originated under its programs often include strict regulatory agreements allowing HUD to intervene if affordability covenants are breached. And then it says why the borrower might not have known. Lender versus note holder. The original lender, such as the bank, may have serviced the loan but sold the note to HUD/FHA on the secondary market, a common practice for FHA insured mortgages. Borrowers are typically not informed about the intricate risk sharing arrangements between CHFA and HUD unless a default occurs. The risk share enhanced loans are explicitly insured by HUD, with CHFA responsible for enforcing regulatory agreements. HUD's claim procedures require servicers to list CHFA as the payee, but HUD ultimately assumes liability for insured loans. The Down Payment Assistance Program, DAP, often pairs with FHA insured first mortgages, creating a dual liability structure. In summary, HUD's ownership of the note during foreclosure stems from its role as an insurer/co-insurer under risk-sharing agreements with CHFA, particularly for FHA-backed loans. The original lender likely transferred the note to HUD after default per program rules. So I'm going to email you this right now so you could read it and have it for your records. But it seems as if what they did was within their rules that they could do.
But when that's awesome, Theodora. Thank you. But the problem here is that if you look at what HUD's mandate is not to make people homeless. First off, whether you own a HUD down payment assistance $3,000, and that gave the right to HUD to have my home because they manipulated the statute codes and regulations and laws to appear that, oh yes, this is all on the up and up. This is the way that it is. That's not what HUD was created for. HUD at the time also had all these HAMP programs and FELP programs. I had to supply 5 years worth of myself and 2 of my adult children, or they're adults now, working part-time jobs, whatever, 5 years worth of income in order to apply for this FELP or HELP program, whatever it was, and got it in on time and everything. They claim that, oh, we ran out of money. HUD is not in the business to make people homeless. They stole my home. And it wasn't just HUD. And this is court foreclosure fraud too, and fraud upon the court, because it's a state law that they allow me to mediation. And they kicked me out of mediation, and all my efforts to get back into mediation. And when I had the money to be reinstated, and I could show you the mortgage with McHugh saying the right to reinstatement. If I give you $13,000, if that's how much you say I owe you, then you need to reinstate me. I go back to paying McHugh mortgage. But because of the tricky business of how the whole process goes, when McHugh, why wasn't it McHugh versus Murphy? There was a Murphy at the time. Why is the bank known at that point as CHFA? It's okay, because I've asked for investigation both by HUD, OIG, and the Department of Justice, and also I'm seeking a Connecticut grand jury, because I could break down the fraud, especially now after I've learned so much more. And if what they did was not fraudulent, they wouldn't have had to have thrown me in prison on October 31st, 2014 on trumped up charges, throw me at CVH in York for 3 months, and make me promise not to go back to Clearview before they let me out. If what they did was on the up and up, they wouldn't have had to have done that. And also my bankruptcy attempt in federal New Haven District Court should have also saved my home. I only owed $62,000 on the principal.
Okay, so just to kind of make sure we're on the same page here. So like it seems like the part that you're claiming where they went wrong was the fact that they kept you away from the mediation, wouldn't allow you to have another chance to do the mediation, and basically cut you out of the entire process
Mhm.
completely. So you had no, even though you were the defendant in the case, you had absolutely no participation after that point,
That's
correct?
right. That's right.
And then,
It went.
okay,
That's
wait,
exactly
wait,
right. Mhm.
okay. So then after that, you started to make complaints and tried to file appeals and things like that, right?
Well, as when the house went into foreclosure, I immediately sent a complaint to HUD, and actually, it's on my Facebook page. My cover photo. You could read the letter. They were supposed to do an investigation. This is some point between 2012, before the house was foreclosed on. I was already telling HUD there's a problem here. In addition, yes, I had attempted throughout the foreclosure process to get the higher court involved.
Well,
And
I'm talking about from when you were not allowed to be part of the mediation forward. So once that
yeah,
happened,
mhm.
did you continue to make complaints?
Oh yeah, I never stopped. I'm still making complaints.
And when you started making complaints, what was the reaction of, well, first of all, were you filing these complaints in the court, or who were you filing these complaints with?
I filed a complaint with the Department of Banking in the state of Connecticut. Okay, I've got all of their emails, an FOI request, and their final conclusion um, that just exposes. I actually also made multiple attempts to go out to Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. It's a quasi-public agency. It's out in pretty far from where Torrington was, and it would have been hard for me to get out there. But I called to go to one of their commissioner meetings. I sent emails to the commissioner. I'm like, look, what you guys are doing in the CHFA home foreclosures is wrong. You need to stop doing this. Whatever my complaint was I don't have all the complaints right in front of me, but yes, I never stopped. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Banking, with the CHFA. I kept filing appeals, and
So the
with HUD
department,
and HUD
sorry,
OIG. Yeah,
the Department of Banking, is that a federal agency?
the state Connecticut Department of Banking.
Okay, so everything that you filed complaints in were various agencies in the state. And what did you experience after you started to file more complaints? Did you experience retaliation at that point?
Um,
I know you mentioned York, which for clarification is York Correctional Institute in Niantic, Connecticut, which is the only women's correctional facility in the state that's a level 5 maximum security women's prison, correct?
yes.
And
Yeah.
what is CDH, CVH? What is that?
That's Connecticut Valley Hospital. It's part of the court's Department of Corrections Whiting Forensic Unit. They send people there to be alleged restored to competency. The court started ordering competency exams against me multiple times starting in 2012, not in the civil action in the foreclosure in Litchfield Superior Court for 3 years. It was in the lower court at the time in Bantam, the low-level criminal traffic court. I was there every month for as long as they were open, since 2010.
And so
Showing
what
up.
were you getting arrested, or were these like tickets and stuff?
Well, I started having the police in Torrington weaponized against me on November 24th, 2010. The first arrest, false arrest, warrantless. It was an ambush, excessive use of force, assault and
Well,
battery.
what do you think prompted that? If this was back in 2010 and the
Yeah.
foreclosure didn't start until 12, did something happen then
Yeah.
to make them retaliate? What was that?
Well, I worked for the Housing Authority of the City of Torrington, which is also known as a HUD Public Housing Authority. I worked for them for 6.5 years, from September 1999 until February of 06. Okay, and in February of 06, I was illegally fired from the Housing Authority. I had managed 430 units of HUD public housing for the economically disadvantaged, elderly, disabled, and near elderly. And starting in 2003, I started making complaints to CHRO and EEOC because every time I tried to stand up for the tenant rights, and in this particular case, it was against illegal evictions. And I was trying to stand up for their fair housing rights and due process rights because that was my job as occupancy specialist. Every time I did that, the director and my supervisor would start retaliating against me. So they wouldn't even let me do my job. And it got so bad that I actually ended up filing a HUD fair housing complaint that the HUD Connecticut field office advised me to file.
How were they retaliating? And what did they start doing?
Oh, in the workplace, it ended up being a textbook example of what is workplace violence, workplace bullying. I wasn't being sent to any training. They were sabotaging my ability to rent apartments. The supervisor, she really hated my guts. She wouldn't even, it would be a month away before I could bring my files to her for reviewing them so that I could offer them apartments. She worked very closely with the 3 or 4 full-time Section 8 employees. They didn't need 3 or 4 full-time Section 8 employees. 2 or 3 of them happened to be the same race as my supervisor, Puerto Rican, and they basically bullied me out of my job. They used the race card. They said that I was a racist. I didn't like Puerto Ricans. And that is furthest from the truth because I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and most of my friends were Mexican, including my first boyfriend I went to the 9th grade prom with. But now all of a sudden, I'm on the job, and Ask Me would not do anything. I paid union dues for 6.5 years. I put in grievances after they started. All of a sudden I'd be accused. You didn't dot your I on this form. Oh, there's a 3-day suspension. You didn't cross your T on this application. There's a 5-day expense. You know what I mean? 3 progressive disciplinary actions. Ask Me didn't help me. And I was fired, and I brought a case to CHRO and EEOC, which, by the way, is useless. Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities, worthless. And so is EEOC and HUD Fair Housing. All of these agencies need to be really eliminated.
So let's just stop for a second because I think that maybe some people don't know what that means. I know that in law school, we had a class where our professor taught us all about EEOC. And basically, she said that it is completely useless and that even though they're not allowed to legally retaliate against you if you go through the process, that most of the time they do retaliate and find other sneaky ways to still fire you and bully you and torture you if you do that. And it's like, once you even get permission to sue, if you can, it's like at that point, it's not even worth keeping your job because they make it miserable.
That's right. Your EEOC is Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, and it's garbage. If you're in a discrimination complaint, number one, you can go to the state agency, which in Connecticut, it's called Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities. They call themselves the Chief Civil Rights Enforcement Agency in the state, and it's a lie. They get paid by EEOC and HUD to enforce fair housing and civil rights laws, and you can kiss your life goodbye if you file a complaint. I filed my first complaint in 2003 because I was being bullied out of my job, and it put the pressure off. I started having better relations. Nothing came of it. I had to file again in 2005. And they need to be defunded. And if my efforts are successful, then I will have them defunded until they correct their process so that they actually do uphold and enforce civil rights and fair housing, or any law. The only thing they enforce is their paycheck and themselves and each other. It's a racket. But I love that you know these things, Theodora, and that you had this law background because you're right on top of, asking all the right questions. The police weaponized me in Torrington because of my housing authority HUD, Public Housing Authority, government corruption whistleblower activity. The police started assaulting and battering me when I filed a lawful notification letter of intent to sue to the city council meeting. It's on public record in September of 2010 and October 2010. You see me on the minutes and giving my complaint. And by November of that year, they found cause to start falsely arresting me and throwing me in prison. If you internet search my name, you can read all sorts of kinds of lies, slander, libel, character assassination, defamation. It's all done intentionally to make the person, and this was actually, I was warned about this when I first started getting bullied at work. And somebody referred me to actually it's called the Bully Institute. And there's a lot of research on this. And I bought a book. I started reading, and I'm like, wow, I'm a textbook example. This is exactly what they're doing to me. And they warn you in the book, hey, don't even bother going to HR or union or anybody, because if this is happening to you, you're basically screwed. Okay. And you can go on support groups and find all this information. And just like Theodora just said, her law professor told her, EEOC, and I'm telling you, retaliation is the name of their game. If you see something and you say something, just kiss your life goodbye, because they will use every dirty trick against you. In my case, they've used lawfare, both civil and criminal law enforcement in multiple states too. They've tried to repeatedly make me homeless, because if I'm homeless, I'm disenfranchised. I can't fight back. And that's what they do.
So I think I'm starting to get a clear understanding now. So basically, you were employed with the housing authority, which directly is getting these federal funding and dealing with HUD and all of that. So you were aware of their discriminatory practices or illegal practices, things that we're doing that were not complying with the rights of these tenants, many of which were disabled, elderly, and or low income. So they don't exactly have the resources to be able to understand what's going on. And when you spoke out, you were then retaliated against by your job. You were bullied. You eventually were fired. You had to fight with EOC. All that was unsuccessful. You lost your job. And then when you started to miss payments on your mortgage and your house went into foreclosure, prior to that, you had already been arrested and used like lawfare against you, where you were getting, you felt you were getting like targeted, and that they were trying to put you in jail, trying to put you in a mental hospital, trying to do whatever they can to silence you.
Yeah.
And then once this like foreclosure happened and they cut you out of the process, they used that as an opportunity to just take the house without giving you any opportunity to get it or save it. Even if you could have got the money, they didn't care. They just said, no, we're stealing it. That's it. They ended up paying a fraction of the cost of what it was worth, which in theory, you could have paid that as well. Anybody could have participated in an auction for a foreclosure and did it, but they made sure that it went directly back to themselves through this, whatever the structure that they had. And then after they took your house, it was like 2015. And then at that point, did you still have criminal cases open?
You know what, Theodora, from November 24th, 2010 through present, the state of Connecticut versus Mary Bagnaschi rages on. The police falsely arrested me in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2014. I finally moved out of Connecticut in 2016. When I came back in 2019, in 2020, the police assaulted and battered me over 100 times with contact that was, I mean, it's unreal. I have a couple of videos about how the police got involved, but they're still prosecuting me on easily provable lies. Every single one of the arrests was easily provable lies. And I've been trying to get a grand jury since 2012, all the way to Connecticut Supreme Court a couple of different times, and appellate, and actually two other private criminal defense attorneys that were appointed and assigned by the judicial branch in the Division of Public Defender Services. What they do if they have a conflict of interest, instead of just, assigning a public defender who works for the state, they assign a private attorney called a special, and they're under contract with the state. Well, they're still shady attorneys, and they're still looking out for number one, which is themselves. And we all know that attorneys don't serve their client. They serve themselves in the best interests of the court, or themselves and each other. But these two attorneys, both Deborah Stevenson, she's in Connecticut. She claims to be a constitutional attorney. She's another piece of shit.
You know what? It's interesting that you mention her, because when I had my youngest daughter, Angelina, illegally taken by a family court judge in 2023. And when this happened, I tried to reach out to any and everybody I could possibly reach out to try to find a lawyer, to try to get somebody to help me. And one of my professors in UConn Law School said, "Oh, try this Deborah Stevenson lady. She's good, give her a call." I called her, and if I remember correctly, she basically was like, "Oh, let me know if you don't find a lawyer in the next month. I'm busy. I'm not going to be able to come for that court date, and I'm not available, or this case might be too complicated." Like, she gave some BS excuse as to why she couldn't help me, and I was like, all right, well, I was expecting this person to be good because the professor spoke highly of her. But it was as soon as I explained to her what was going on, and she realized my case involved fraud and corruption and RICO, all of a sudden it's oh no, call this person, then call the next person, and they don't help you. So what, tell me, how was she involved again?
Oh, well, Theodora, if you go to her website, she claims to have expertise in whistleblower cases. And to try to make a long story short, I was charged with a breach of peace in 2013. Okay. And it was illegally transferred to Waterbury in 2014. It finally went to what they call a trial in January of 2016. And the court and the prosecutor and my forced public pretender special private attorney, they all allowed the evidence to be withheld to the jury. That's a Brady violation. And it shouldn't have even been in Waterbury in the first place for charges alleged out of Torrington. They didn't have jurisdiction, nor did they obtain it correctly. There's articles that you can read about that on the newspaper, alleging local woman charged with threatening court personnel. I've never had any threatening charges out of 10 years of false arrests and 14 years of ongoing malicious prosecution. I was found guilty of one breach of peace, and that is a maximum 2-year. I'm sorry, federal, sentencing guidelines on that is something like 6 months or a fine. A breach of peace, it's a nothing burger. Okay. From the date of arrest and thrown in prison, pre-conviction on high cash bonds, doing really hard time at York and Connecticut Valley Hospital Whiting Forensic Unit. I'm talking about really, really hard time. And I already served, by the time it went to trial and I was sentenced, they sentenced me to 2 years of probation with conditions that I continue outpatient behavioral health. That's their thing, And I always fly through outpatient behavioral health like a flying, okay, what do you want me to, all right, whatever. But I don't do, I hate any kind of medication. And they've actually forced that upon me several times in the judicial branch through Whiting and CVH. Whiting is CVH, but the York Correctional and the UConn prison industry, man, we could talk all day about how bad that is, but and how half the people there, or 3/4 of them, haven't even been sentenced. because it's a human trafficking scheme. They make a lot of money on, all crimes are commercial. And they made a lot of money off of me stealing my home and equity of 20 years and putting me in prison all these years, cha-ching, cha-ching. And the thing is that I kind of lost my train of thought, but when I was found guilty of the breach of peace and I completed the 2 years of probation, how Deborah Stevenson got involved is I took the guilty verdict to appeal, and they assigned Deborah Stevenson. And she lost the appeal, okay? And furthermore, she also, the Supreme Court wouldn't take the case after she lost the appeal. And her and I were no longer in business with each other, right? She's done. I was living in Utah at the time. I escaped for a beautiful 4.5 years out in Utah to get away from the criminality, everywhere I went. My big joke in Torrington is that I can't fart in Torrington without somebody calling the police, whether I fart or not. I've had charges stacked up against me, up to 14 every year on ridiculous, frivolous charges, and all of them have been waived, or except for what's going on now, and all of them have been nollied or whatever, except for that one breach of peace. But can you imagine 14 years of malicious prosecution? Go to ct.gov, find out how many convictions I have. You'll see the breach of peace. 14 years, and that's all they've got out of me. I'm quite a criminal, aren't I? But Deborah Stevenson lost the appeal. So all of a sudden in Utah, she contacts me and she says, I feel bad about your situation. And you can actually go on the website, ct.gov, and look this case up. She filed a civil case in Litchfield Superior Court in 2018. It's called Mary Bagnaschi versus State of Connecticut, City of Torrington, Torrington Housing Authority, et al. I didn't work for et al. That's another story. And it was a verified complaint for a declaratory ruling. And I'm told that she was given permission by the court. The judicial branch paid her to file this civil case. The Division of Public Defender Services assigned her to file this civil case. And I was in Utah at the time. And in 2018, she filed the civil case and it went along. You'll see it online. The state AG put in a motion to dismiss all of them the city put in a motion to strike. And this is a fascinating case. First off, this case should have been filed with the Department of Ethics, was the one that should have made a verified declaratory ruling, and I've asked for this, literally, Theodora. I have asked the AG and all of the people who can ask an AG to make a correct formal legal opinion. I've asked for this since January 6, 2006, when Blumenthal was the AG. I sought whistleblower protection and to file an ethics complaint against the Housing Authority of the City of Torrington. And they won't let me. You can find this case online. They're claiming that the Housing Authority since 2006, and they is the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. It's the Office of Public Hearings. They made a decision on my whistleblower complaint. They threw out my whistleblower complaint without giving me a hearing, claiming that the Housing Authority is not a quasi-public agency, and therefore I don't qualify. And if you read the 6-page ruling online, furthermore, we don't have jurisdiction to hear this case. But they simultaneously are claiming, without a formal legal opinion. I've asked every AG since Blumenthal, 8 years of Jepson and now Tong, make a correct formal legal opinion, because both Connecticut statutes, and I've proven this since 2006, Connecticut statutes identify about 115 individual Connecticut housing authorities as quasi-public agencies. And HUD identifies them as quasi-public agencies. And I worked for a HUD public housing authority. Both the state statute and federal rules of regulation identify it as a quasi-public agency. So nobody can tell me why there's an entire class of public servants who work for these housing authorities. I mean, there's got to be at least 10 employees at 115 individual housing authorities. If they dare speak out about corruption, and I'm not the only one who tried to bring a whistleblower complaint, but the Office of Public Hearings, based on the faulty ruling, and they won't bring it back. I'm putting in, well, I don't want to talk about what I'm doing, but I've tried to get them to correct that, because look, HUD is corrupt. If there's 115 Connecticut housing authorities all receiving HUD public housing Section 8 funding, and those frontline workers like me in my position, hey, we got a problem here. You know, she wants to evict all these vulnerable people. They don't have any substantive due process rights. It's on bullshit hearsay, unsubstantiated lease violations. I was occupancy specialist. We got to keep them there. If they're not keeping their apartment clean, we're going to get them help to keep their apartment clean. You know what I mean? Or whatever. We're not going to just send them a notice you're being evicted, which is illegal according to HUD regulations as well. So, you know, I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but yeah. It's
so I'm just going to just chime in for a minute now. Also, I had some experience with Plymouth Housing Authority because I was, you know, they were basically taking ads out in my paper, my newspaper, and a lot of it, like, he would say, like, for like requests for qualifications, and like there was like these requirements, like he had to put the legal notice, he had to send it to at least so many papers and whatever. And like he said to me that he discovered in maybe 2020, 2021, that there was like millions and millions of dollars that had been given in a grant for this HUD thing back in like the 90s. And whoever was managing the money for the town of Plymouth didn't realize that that money was there. So it just sat there for like 20 years and nobody ever did anything with it. So then when he like came in and like discovered the money was there, he started saying, okay, we need to put out legal notices asking for people to, you know, use the money and stuff. So it's just crazy how many other towns mismanage the money and there's zero oversight with it. And it was like, they didn't care. Like he would spend no matter what the price was. He didn't care because he's like, okay, I'm getting another $1 million check next week. Oh, I'm waiting on another $2 million check next week. And it's like, okay, this is so much fraud and waste. Like Doge needs to look into that. But I did want to say something. You mentioned Richard Blumenthal, who, for those who don't know, is currently a senator, United States Senator representing the state of Connecticut. And you mentioned that in the past, he was the Attorney General for the state of Connecticut, which I did not know. And it was interesting to me. So here's a little bit of a history for our listeners. For those of you who don't know, the state of Connecticut actually did 3 things that are unconstitutional that strategically took away the power from people in the state of Connecticut. They abolished sheriffs, grand juries, counties in the state of Connecticut. And the abolition of sheriffs, grand juries, and county governments in Connecticut involved multiple actors, including former Attorney General Richard Blumenthal, Governor John Rowland, and the state legislature. These changes raised constitutional questions about legislative overreach into judicial functions and created potential conflicts of interest for Blumenthal in his current role as a U.S. Senator. And here's the timeline. Now, just for the record, I did not know this until 2 years ago when somebody told me about this. And then I started researching and realized, like, this is crazy. So in 1960, the county governments in the state of Connecticut were abolished via Public Act 152, which went into effect in the year 1960, which transferred any remaining responsibilities, such as jails, for example, to the state or towns. In 1982, 22 years later, Connecticut voters approved a constitutional amendment replacing the grand jury indictments for capital crimes with probable cause hearings. Now, in the United States Constitution, we have the right to summon a grand jury for capital crimes. We have the right to have a private prosecution through the process of getting a grand jury to do an indictment. But in 1982, Connecticut removed that grand jury indictment mechanism and replaced it with probable cause hearings, which was codified into law in the year 1983 under Connecticut General Statute Section 54-46A. The impact of this was that it effectively abolished the indicting grand jury system through investigative grand jury, though investigative grand juries remained. By the 2000s, the state grand juries were largely dormant, with federal prosecutors handling high-profile cases. By the year 2000, sheriffs were also abolished via a 2000 constitutional referendum during Governor Rowland's administration, replacing them with state marshals under executive control. As Attorney General, Blumenthal supported reforms to address corruption in the sheriff system. So their claims that there was corruption in the sheriff system led to them abolishing the sheriff system and replacing it with state marshals, which are under executive control, which again further distances the power from the people. And you used to be able to summon a grand jury and a jury of your peers in order to say, look, this public official is committing a federal crime. We're going to do a grand jury indictment. Then the sheriff would be able to go arrest the person. But no more sheriffs, no more grand juries, and no more county governments over that 40-year period from 1960 to 2000. 40 years. It completely stripped all of the power. And think about it. That was 25 years ago.
That's right.
And Connecticut's Constitution, Article 2, mandates a separation of powers among legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Critics argue that these changes blur those lines because now there's a legislative encroachment on the judiciary. The legislature's abolition of grand juries and sheriffs shifted the authority to the executive branch and legislative processes. The state judiciary's reliance on federal prosecutors for major cases due to the inactive state grand juries also weakened its independence. The sheriff system's replacement with state marshals, which are executive appointees, and the decline of state grand juries reduced judicial oversight, centralizing power in the legislature and the governor. As with U.S. Senator Blumenthal's past actions, it creates current potential conflicts of interest in his current legislative role. Example, Blumenthal pursued corruption cases against Rowland and the Tommaso Group as Attorney General. Now, as senator, he sponsors ethics reforms, which critics argue could disproportionately target political adversaries, i.e., John Flynn. Legislative power over judiciary. Blumenthal's support for centralizing prosecutorial power by weakening the state grand juries as AG aligns with his current efforts to expand federal oversight, potentially undermining state judicial autonomy. And to summarize, the 2000 sheriff abolition and the 1982 grand jury reforms were ratified through constitutional processes, but they disrupted the balance of power and in turn are unconstitutional. The federal dominance in Connecticut's prosecution highlights the state's reliance on external entities, raising questions about self-governance. And keep in mind, Rowland was prosecuted by federal authorities for corruption and went to prison. So in summary, these changes reflect decades-long shift towards legislative executive control over judicial function. And Richard Blumenthal has a dual role, which amplifies the concerns about accountability and separation of powers. And you know just as well as I do that our executive branch does not respond, has never responded, and looks the other way. The AG's office protects the judges and state entities. And then I've never seen like a federal grand jury indicting somebody who's actually like a state employee or somebody
That's
affiliated
right.
with the state. It's always like they're indicting drug dealers and it's always people. It's never
Yeah,
officials. And
it's
there's a
true.
reason why Connecticut is called, it's supposed to be the Constitution state, but everybody makes fun of it because it's not. It's like the worst state that you could possibly live in for if you have for elderly, for
Mhm.
disabled, for parents, for everything. Even if you get arrested, like the dangerous violent criminals get a slap on the wrist, but like innocent people get tortured and put in prison.
No
Like
kidding. Yeah.
you mentioned Whiting. I know that we talked about, people like Sam Magliari and now John Flynn, and they're basically
Mhm.
weaponizing what is supposed to be like a medical facility is being actually treated like a torture facility to silence people. And there's
Right.
supposed to be like whistleblower protections. There's supposed to be, witness protection, things like that. But when you actually try to ask for that, they retaliate 10 times more. So do you have anything to add in terms of, what I was talking about with the history of this or anything else
Oh
that
boy.
I left
Thank you. Wow, Theodora, you're brilliant. I love the way you covered all of that. Very detailed and correct information. Very professionally just provided to the people. Um, I found out about all that and have studied it. Now, Blumenthal was the AG. Okay, literally kind of funny on January 6th, 06. Okay. Um, Kind of easy to remember that date now, right? January 6th. But I was still employed full time at the housing authority. And you want to talk about the vulnerable, the most vulnerable population, economically disadvantaged, elderly, near elderly, and disabled. Um, they're the population that have the most barriers, poor people, let alone being elderly and disabled. But and the AG is and the comptroller and everything, they're supposed to be protecting these people, but they don't. And I want everybody to please go to the Register Citizen and type in the name Bradford Harmon. He was a near elderly, legally blind tenant at the Torrington Towers. And he was an activist as a legally blind person that liked to walk around town with his walking stick. And he had advocated for the city to improve the sidewalks around the towers. And he was one of the 6.5 years that I worked there. I loved all my tenants. They were my people. I loved them dearly. And Brad would always come in and say hi to me. And I'd make sure that the documents that I sent him were always large font, a real simple ADA accommodation. And when I was fired in February 06, I became employed at Primetime. It's a psychosocial recreational club in Torrington. I was working there full time as a job coach. And we used to have community meals, preparation and eating down. We were sitting there and somebody said, hey, somebody committed suicide at the towers. Read the article, Bradford Harmon. He was targeted after I was fired with one of these evictions that Claudia Sweeney, the executive director, she's a tyrant. And I've been, comes in from New York making about 150 grand a year. These properties are already bought and paid for. What is she doing with all the rental income and the HUD money? It's a racket. But she had
How do you spell his name?
Bradford, Bradford Harmon. And you'll read the article how he hung himself from the 13th floor of a home he had for 13 years. And he got an eviction notice after I was fired. And this is what she was telling me to do. And then the person who took over my job does gladly. I'm like, no, I'm not sending him this letter. Dear tenant, you are in violation of ABC, a lease violation, unsubstantiated minor lease violation, allegation. Therefore, you are being evicted. You have until the end of the month to get out. And if you don't, then you're going to be wrapped up in a certain eviction in Banham Court, which is 20 minutes away. How's this guy going to get there? He gets the eviction notice. He says, fine, you want me out? I'll get out. And he hung himself. I can't get the AG. And if you read the article, the Torrington police, shame on them. They should have opened up an investigation. And so should have the AG and the Division of Criminal Justice. Because when he got that eviction letter, he wasn't given any HUD mandated pre-eviction hearing. HUD mandates that these people have the tenant come in and work out whatever lease violation before they file eviction notices. They don't do that. And so that's HUD violation number one. Why are you going to try to evict somebody for a minor alleged unsubstantiated lease violation? Because they're not building new units. Throughout the 30 years that I know of HUD and Torrington and even Section 8, not only in Torrington, but out in Utah, a city the size, they have the same number of Section 8 vouchers that they had when they first started the program. All right. Maybe they've gotten a few more, but they're not building new developments. So they've got to evict the people illegally to get openings. Okay. So that they can give the appearance that there's a wait list that they're managing. But the thing is that my job as occupancy specialist was to house people, not to evict them. And that's where I got into a pissing match with the executive director and how I started getting bullied out of my job. She's like, oh, well, I'm the eviction queen. I never lose. Yeah, because you have a private attorney that you pay $350 an hour. The same attorney who represented me on my house, by the way, when I bought it. He's the eviction king, and and gives Claudia Sweeney. Oh, they go in, and Paul Griffin.
What's his name? Paul Griffin.
Attorney Paul Griffin out of Torrington. Him and Moratti, Griffin, and Galicio. They're all crooks. I could go through law firm after law firm and tell you they're all crooks. Of course, we know that, but that's why we need to restore the grand jury. And I've tried multiple times to get the legislatures to say, hey, the people need to be able to access the grand jury, because I can't give a prosecutor or a judge in what you had mentioned it. The Connecticut grand jury now is based on a probable cause hearing. And I started seeking that, an evidentiary hearing, all the way to appellate and Supreme Court, dozen times. One probable cause hearing for me to present my evidence that would give the judge and or state attorney enough information that would require them to apply for a grand jury. They won't. Instead, they will prosecute me and send me to prison and send me to hell. They will not apply for a grand jury. So we need to be able to access the grand jury. And the grand jury cannot be a 1 to 3 judge panel with the state attorney's office prosecuting. We need independent, almost like a private attorney general that isn't connected
that's the
with.
thing. Like, how can the state's attorney and judges prosecute another state's attorney and judge? They can't. There's a conflict, so they won't and they can't. So that's the thing. Is there a such thing as a federal grand jury that people can access in this situation, or is it only per state?
That is a very good question, and I have pursued both, and I don't have the answers since 2012. When
you say you're pursued both, how did you pursue it in the past on a federal level? Was there...
On the federal level, that's a very good question. But basically by research and filing multiple formal criminal complaints to the Connecticut and Utah, because Utah got involved in this shit 2019. This is a RICO problem. It followed me out to Utah, and they got involved, and it's terrible how they weaponize law enforcement and the judiciary against you. But I have filed a formal, it was a certified mail, 55-page notice and demand letter, both to Merrick Garland and OIG Michael Horowitz. I sent that 55-page document out in November of, actually maybe October of 2022 or 3. And I also sent, well, that's how I've addressed it on the federal level. But U.S. attorneys in both Connecticut and Utah, and the civil litigation unit in D.C. and the ADA litigation unit, I've gotten the forms, filled out the complaints, sent evidence, and then I got emails. I make exhibits, attachments with emails of evidence. I have been very relentless as their retaliation has been my pursuit. I've had to learn how to really defend, and my defense and offense is weakened by my disability. I have legal abuse syndrome, for one, and but listen, Theodore, if we could get the grand jury accessible, and again, the whole law needs to be changed in the state of Connecticut. It's made, you're talking about intentional 40 or 50 years of political engineering in the Capitol, in every state, and there are attorneys that are doing this, manipulating the statutes, the codes, rules, regulations, so that they have intentionally watered down the grand jury, the whistleblower, the ethics. And when you talk about Blumenthal's office on January 606, I attempted to file a whistleblower complaint because I was getting retaliated against. They broke the law right then and there, and Blumenthal has backed this up ever since. And I can't get the legislatures to address it ever since '06, when I found out that the whistleblower and ethics laws does not apply to an entire class of Connecticut Housing Authority employees. That's over 1,000 public servants who are frontline workers. You're really mandatory reporters. If you see elderly being abused, it's your job to defend them, But anyways, AG claims that the housing authorities are not quasi-public agencies. Therefore, the employees are not eligible for equal protection or even investigation on a housing authority complaint, whistleblower, or corruption complaint. Either the Division of Criminal Justice, by the way, who I wrote in '08, a very long letter, I told them, because they had a public integrity unit. They dissolved the public integrity unit too. Find out, Theodora, if you can, when the Connecticut Division of Criminal Justice, they used to have a public integrity unit. It was dissolved, and recently, over the past 2 years or so, they replaced it with what they're calling a conviction integrity unit. And again, it's so watered down. But that damn Blumenthal, not only did he never defend whistleblowers at the housing authorities in Connecticut when he was AG, but as senator, here's what he did that I have also filed a Senate ethics complaint. I sent the Senate Ethics Committee a letter. I also sent it to the Congress Judiciary Committee, Weaponization Committee, but I sent it in 2021, and I'm following up with it. I know, whether I'm doing this or not, but I have enough evidence against Senator Blumenthal and Chris Murphy, that they should be demanding hearings, both Jim Jordan on the Weaponization Committee and Senate Judiciary. I want Blumenthal and Murphy to be grilled, and ask the questions that I will send to the people asking the questions. It's mind-blowing. Both Senator Blumenthal and Chris Murphy, each of them assigned constituent services for me in 2011, and Murphy was congressman at that time. And how that happened on July 5th, 2011, I happened to read the newspaper and learned that Chris Murphy was going to be at Susan B. Anthony Project for Women in what he was calling a congressional domestic violence roundtable discussion. And I showed up and I sat at the end of the room, and I didn't know at the time that CTN, I was like right in their camera thing. And then when Murphy came in, he basically sat right in front of me, but to the side. So, and this bullshit domestic violence seminar, it said, Rohraback was there. He was either a senator or state rep at the time. The chief of police was there and other dignitaries. I ended up giving a off-the-cuff interview. And what the focus was the domestic violence that the tenants of the housing authority suffer by way of the tyrant, Claudia Sweeney, who somebody needs to take the knife away from her. Making people evicted, and then they're never able to get housing again. She brags, she's the eviction queen. She never loses. This isn't a human service agency. It's a business. It's my way or the highway. This Claudia Sweeney from New York, she's a multimillionaire by way of the money that she gets paid to be executive director of these agencies, and she's ruthless. And there needs to be a criminal investigation, but you can't get the Division of Criminal Justice, either their dissolved public integrity unit, their housing unit. You can't get them to do an investigation. You can't get the state police major crime unit to do an investigation. I can't get the New Haven or Salt Lake City FBI to do an investigation, or the U.S. Attorney, all the way to the Justice Department, Civil Litigation Unit. You wouldn't believe the volumes of work that I've sent these people. I'm never going to give up until I have resolution to this. And I'm hoping that the DOJ program will come to Connecticut. Everybody's that I'm familiar with on Facebook is begging for it. And some people like I have already made contact with the Justice Department repeatedly through multiple, and Obama, President Obama got a letter from me. So, I'm going to keep doing that because we have to. We have to. We don't have any affordable housing in this entire country, and there's a serious lack of subsidized low-income housing, and it's so grossly criminally mismanaged. The billions of dollars that HUD and IRS low-income housing tax credit programs and DSS, there's so many government industrial complex federal agencies funding that affordable housing industry. Oh man, and it's mind-blowing, and it's across the country. That's why we don't have any affordable housing. It's all politically engineered. Just like you want to know something too about Blumenthal, what his plan was when he got rid of the the sheriffs. You know what he did when he was AG? He brags that he brought the number of assistant attorney generals to 300 under his term. There were up to 300 assistant attorney generals. What do? They all defend state agencies and elected reps. They don't do anything of what they're supposed to do. And if you go to them with an individual complaint, we don't help private people. You have to get a private attorney. But Blumenthal built up that number of assistant state attorneys. When they eliminated the sheriffs, now we're not paying sheriffs, we're paying attorneys. And they're getting, you see Tong doing this, more and more AG investigations. First off, that is supposed to be a function of our law enforcement, like the sheriffs and or the Division of Criminal Justice. If there's lawbreakers out there, it's not the AG that's supposed to go in and be superhero, but they've manifested so many employment jobs for attorneys. Connecticut's screwed. That's all I can say. Cancel.
People don't realize the Attorney
not.
General's office, their role is to defend any state employee, state agency, or entity that gets sued, where they spend millions of dollars on these lawyers, actually teams of lawyers. Like when I file a lawsuit, they'll have 2 or 3 lawyers from the AG's office all defending the judge that I'm suing. And it's okay, why are my tax dollars covering the legal fees of the person who violated my rights and kidnapped my kids? That's not what I should be paying for. Why shouldn't she pay for that out of their pocket? And even I included in my RICO lawsuit, there's a girl that she lives in Watertown. Her name's Jamie Hobart Lambo. If you look her up, her father is also a state marshal, Brian Hobart, and he was a state marshal for years, decades. And then she used to be a Waterbury cop. Then she became a state marshal. She's also involved in the Democratic Party in she was a clerk for the Democratic Party or whatever. And then she also is a police commissioner for Watertown now. And she is a state marshal, which according to the Connecticut website on state marshals, it states that they are not state employees. They are independent contractors that have to have their own everything and keep their own books, and they're not employees. So when I filed a lawsuit and I included her as collusion in RICO and her husband, who's best friends with my ex and baptized my daughter, they turned around and said that the attorney general's office was representing Jamie. And I'm like, why are you representing her?
Right.
First of all, she comes
Ooh.
from money. First of all, she can afford her own lawyer. Her family's wealthy. Second of all, why the fuck is she getting a free lawyer when she's not a state employee? And he's like, oh, well, I'm not sure what her role was. And it wasn't clear if what she did was during her official capacity as a marshal. I'm like, no, she never worked as a marshal to serve us papers. She never did anything in her official role. Everything is on her own free time, misusing the law enforcement tools in order to stalk and harass and help my ex. And even after I like disputed it and filed a motion asking to like disqualify him as her attorney and all of this stuff, they still kept him on as her attorney. And so she still had a free lawyer the whole time as a state marshal when she is not a state employee. So they're going above and beyond and like representing people who they legally are not supposed to be representing. And it's messed up because like I also tried to report to the ag.fraud@ct.gov email that they were doing fraud. And they're like, oh, this isn't the right place to report that. I go, so then where else would I report fraud if not the AG's fraud office? Like, it's like, how stupid do these people think that people are? And like most of the time, if you say something smart, they just don't respond because they're being instructed not to respond rather than to say something to dig themselves into an even deeper hole. So, I mean, I think that it's good that you have like posted a lot because I wouldn't have seen your story if I didn't see your posts. And I think like after seeing a bunch of your posts on Facebook and seeing how you were talking about the grand jury system and all these things that I kept hearing about, I was like, you know, I have to reach out to you to find out more about your story. And, you know, it's crazy because like you bring more like insight into this side of it where they're stealing houses. And I know like there was another person who I was talking to that he just recently went through like a fake BS eviction. And I think he said the similar thing where they cut him out of the case, where they wouldn't allow him to participate in the hearing. And he tried to file a motion to intervene and they wouldn't allow it. And he tried doing all these things and, you know, appeals and federal and, you know, similar to what you did. And they ended up just doing an ejectment like a week ago. And he posted it where they like came in 20 marshals deep and stole his house. And he had an estate with like millions and millions of dollars from like the family estate, but it was like mismanaged by whatever attorney was appointed who ended up stealing all the money and all the assets. And so it's like even people who have no money and people who have generations of wealth, it doesn't make a difference. You are getting your house stolen. They're going to try to steal it any way they can. And I mean, I think that one of the things that people can focus on is trying to get these laws changed or overturned that abolished the grand jury system and abolished the sheriffs. If they can pressure the legislature to amend it and change it and give that power back, citing that it's unconstitutional, if we could get people to support this and you know, keep pushing this message, I think that could open the door for giving people a little bit more power, right? Because right now we have zero power. We're supposed to have all the power. So cracking the door open,
you know, it's ridiculous.
Help, you know?
I'll tell you, you just hit the nail right on the head. And when you look at the history of how politically engineered for 30 or 40 years, they've watered down the whistleblower law, the ethics law, the grand jury. They dissolved the criminal public integrity unit. You know, the Division of Criminal Justice, they're only and this is a constitutional requirement when they were formed as an agency. Their requirement is to investigate all crime in Connecticut. I've reported criminal government corruption to them and the whistleblower units, 3 different whistleblower units, literally since 2003. And they will not investigate, like you said, even the federal department. You look at the Connecticut U.S. Attorney and you go to their Facebook page, you'll always read the story. Oh, they got this private drug addict. They got this private, whatever. Every now and then you'll see a doctor getting busted for Medicare fraud or whatever. You know what I mean? But they don't go after any government and corruption. And HUD OIG won't either. And the Office of Inspector General of the Justice Department, and EEOC, I go to the offices of Inspector General. They won't. They don't do anything.
Yeah, and why do you think they go after? Why do you think they go after the drugs? Because it directly impacts their pockets. Because they're seeing it as, oh, if people are selling drugs on the street, they're not paying money in pharmaceuticals for those same drugs. So let's arrest them and put them in jail so that we control all of the supply. And that's basically what they're doing. And like, it's also crazy. Like you said, like it's always stuff like that, like guns, drugs, like, and it's never a judge going to jail. It's never stuff like that. And like, who initiated the investigation against Roland? Who initiated the investigation against Joe Ganim? None of that was, I bet you that it was all purely federal.
Interesting.
I mean, I don't know for sure. I would have to look, but just guessing, I would assume it wasn't Connecticut people who started that.
And when they dissolved the Public Integrity Unit and they dissolved the sheriffs and they watered down all this other stuff, the corruption didn't go away. It just seeped back into, like you gave a perfect example of the marshal, alleged non-state employee. The marshal services, even they're so corrupt too. They got involved in an eviction that was totally illegal, totally immoral during the eviction. I mean, during the coronavirus in 2020, March of 2020, I got wrapped into a housing situation and an illegal eviction, and the state marshal's serving me papers, and I'm like, hey, state marshal, like, you see that this is fraud, and I even filed a complaint. You see that my landlord was not the owner of the house, that it was a sublet through Vicky Grathwall, who's a felon, and she's the one that, it was all corruption. And they're, oh, well, we don't do that. All we do is get paid to serve the papers. Sorry, we're not going to, look into your complaint that what we're doing is wrong. Oh, you're just going to serve papers that are wrong? Talking about the attorneys, have you ever read the Connecticut practice book, Attorney Oath? My God Almighty, I haven't. Yeah, you, of course. Yeah, duh. That was a dumb question, but
I've read the whole practice book.
Yes,
100 times at this point.
And I'm the only one out of all these years of litigation that actually uphold whatever I can of the Connecticut practice book. Not one judge, not one attorney, not one, even going back to the administrative processes that I, at the executive branch level. Hey, I've even gone to the legislatures trying to get a petition of remonstrance.
But you know what?
They won't let you.
You're making a good point again, because like the practice book is made by the rules committee. Who's on the rules committee? The same people that make the rules decide who makes the rules. And in the rules committee, they decide what goes in the practice book, and they can change it anytime that they want. So when they have like forms, like for example, with the ADA, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, they had a form. At the bottom of the form, it says, if your request is denied, you can file an appeal. After I kept trying to file appeals for them violating my rights, they then quietly in the middle of the night changed the form. So now the form says, instead of saying if you violate, you can file an appeal, it says there is no right to file an appeal. You can only file an appeal at the end of your case if on the final disposition. You cannot have any right to file an appeal on this. And like same thing with, there was a rule in the practice book that said for a recusal that if you file a motion for recusal, that a judge has options. They can either recuse themselves, or they can have another judge have a hearing for the recusal. That's what it said, right? For like 2 years. Then after I filed motions to recuse Kevin Russo and Auden Groggins, who are Milford Superior Court criminal judges, after I filed recusals on them in my criminal cases, they changed the next day. They quietly in the middle of the night changed the practice book again
Yeah.
Because it always says it says like updated March 2024 or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
it changed
I
it
hear
to
you.
say that now, because then we had a hearing, and I'm like, I need you to be recused, and he's like, okay, well, I'm denying my recusal. I'm like, you can't do that legally. You have to have another judge has to preside over the hearing, and he's like, nope, I can legally preside over my own. So I quickly looked it up, and it said like updated that day before to change the law to say that now a judge can choose to preside over his own recusal. So
What
I was
the
like,
hell? What
fine,
year was that? What year was that?
2024,
Oh God.
2024, because my hearing was, it was March 4th, 2024 was the day of my court date. And I think it said it was updated February 2024. So like literally like a week before they did this, they went and changed the practice book. And then I called him out and I said on the record, I was like, listen, I'm saying this on the record that now the law has changed. It didn't used to say that last week, but now it does. And I'm saying this is unconstitutional or whatever. And I'm like, so if you're going to preside over your own recusal, I'm allowed to question you and cross-examine you, right? And he's like, yeah, I was like, okay. So then he started saying things now, and I was like trying to like cross-examine, ask him questions, and like I asked him like he tried to pretend he didn't know who I was. He's like, I've never even seen anything about your case. I don't know anything about you, blah blah blah. And then I said something about my daughter, and he was like, oh well, Judge Grossman said that, whatever. And I'm like, well, why are you bringing up Judge Grossman if you don't know who I am? Because you can't Google Judge Grossman's name without seeing my face. And so how are
Wow.
you going to bring her up and claim that you don't know me at the same time? And then he didn't know what to say. He's like, like all stuttering and scared. And then he's like, okay, we're going to go on recess. Puts us on recess. And then 4 hours later, the clerk at 4:45 p.m. sends me an email after hundreds of people were waiting on the Zoom call. Like I put on Facebook, join my Zoom call. I'm facing like 9 years in prison. Everybody joined. There was like 100 people on the call.
Wow.
Everybody sat there and waited for 4 hours for this recess to finish. And then they had the nerve to have this clerk who has no oath of office and he's just a judicial employee send me an email 10 minutes before the court closes. And he was like, oh, the judge is not coming back on the hearing. Therefore, if you want his recusal, you have to come in person next week for the recusal hearing. But I had right before then gotten granted an ADA accommodation that all my hearings would be on Zoom. So I was like,
Wow.
I'm like, all my hearings were granted to be on Zoom as an ADA. Why are you now threatening me that if I only want to have a hearing, it has to be in person? That's intimidation, violating my rights under the ADA,
Yeah.
going against that, trying to force me to come in person when I was already granted an accommodation to go on Zoom. And then they just didn't respond. Then it was like, whatever. Now the thing's still in limbo 2 years later, even though the speedy trial law says they have to close my case after 1 year. And, also like there's plenty, if you read the statutes in the Connecticut general statutes, a lot of the statutes have the force of dictating to the judiciary how to do their job, where it dictates and mandates what a judge has to do and things like that, which is illegal. That's violating the separation of powers even more. And so it's like in Connecticut, it's just like a enmeshment of the three branches where there's zero separation. And then they also have like the police and the marshals and everything is like their little like lackeys that they're goons. And then like what are you going to do? If you try to stand on your rights, you go in jail or the hospital or whatever, and then they torture you in there. I mean, you and I know what it's like in there. And it's like, it's so deeply corrupted that this is why when I say to people like Connecticut's like the worst state, everybody's like, no, my state's bad. Oh, Texas is bad. California is bad. Okay, go see what Connecticut has done and then come back and talk to me. Because it's like, I see people in other states filing things in the higher courts and they get them overturned. Like I know a girl in Tennessee, she was filing stuff in her case in the federal courts there. The judges were recusing themselves. I filed the same thing in Connecticut federal court. The judge refused to recuse himself. So it's like, there's no laws. There's no like uniformity in the way that they are enforcing things. And it's like pick and choose. If they like you, then the laws don't apply to you. If they don't like you, then they're going to weaponize the laws against you. So,
Exactly. But you know
But,
what about the
yeah.
the attorney oath? My thing is it says something in the attorney oath in Connecticut that they will not knowingly do anything wrong in the court, right? It says something along those lines. I'm like, didn't your parents teach you the difference between right and wrong? You don't know that since 2010 through present, that what 100 or more attorneys in the state of Connecticut are doing to me is wrong? Your parents didn't teach you right, because clearly we don't need a constitution or anything else to know the difference between right or wrong. You don't do that to people. Like, for instance, Claudia Sweeney, you don't evict the most vulnerable, economically disadvantaged with your $350 an hour private attorney paid for by public funds, while you're making about 150 grand to oversee low-income housing. Where's all the money going? In her pocket, in the attorney's pockets that are evicting these poor people. No substantial due process rights or anything. And that's what I was fighting for.
30 years ago, like it was like 1996 to like 30 years ago, we were evicted from a house that we had in Bethany, and the marshals came. I was like 4 years old at the time. My brother with Down syndrome was 3 years old. So there was a disabled child, and they came, forcibly evicted us, told us we had 24 hours to leave, said to my mom, if she goes back in the house for any reason whatsoever, that they will arrest her. My mom said that she had like fish tanks that were like part of like the wall, like a custom fish tank that's like a shelf kind of. And she had all these like exotic, like Pacific Ocean fish and everything. She said that on the day of the eviction, they came there with all these movers that were sent from the town or whatever, and forcibly started taking everything and throwing it in these like trailers or whatever. And she said that they went in there and started smashing the fish tanks. They smashed all the fish tanks to drain the water and kill the fish, because their instructions were to go in there and empty everything. And so it's like they could have just left the fish and like put them in another bowl, and like they could have just left it like that. Instead, they killed them all. And all of our stuff, like all the like valuables, like gold, like everything from the day I was born, baptisms, things like that, where people will give you like a gold necklace and you can't wear it because you're only a baby. Like everything I ever had stolen and destroyed. And like, so it's not like they just come in there and peacefully do it. They literally will like steal, destroy. And I've heard other stories in lawsuits. Like there was a lawsuit about the guy Brian Hobart where somebody sued him for same kind of thing. They said he went in with his guys and stole everything and destroyed things. And like the guy had proof. And then when you try to sue them, they say that they have absolute immunity because they're working an arm of the state, even though they're not a state employee. And so I had some experience with that as a kid. And, that was like a traumatic experience when I was really young. And then like now to see that things are like still really corrupt with what they're doing, and that it's like not just in the housing courts, but criminal courts, like they've put me in jail without bonds. They have done things to me that are terrible and retaliated against me. And it's like the more I speak up and the more I try to like tell the truth, the more I get like silenced and retaliated against. So I think that the only thing that people can do is keep speaking up, because if you don't, then nobody's going to know. And like, I wouldn't have known what's going on in the family courts until they stole my kids. Like I had gone to court so many times and nothing bad happened. So I just thought this is just a normal thing. I would have never known that people are going and getting forcibly medicated at Whiting until hearing about it with my own ears. Like, so all I can say is that, keep doing what you're doing and like,
Oh,
you
you
know,
too,
keep
Theodore.
staying strong
Yeah.
and try to get more people to support the idea of fighting against this, like the sheriff and um, grand jury and everything, like to try to like get public pressure to reverse all that, because I think that could be the first step to like us being able to actually like pursue criminal charges against these corrupt public officials. And in the meantime, we can also pursue and research about ways to get the federal government to step in, since the state has put
Absolutely.
in these like blocks. But is there anything else that you wanted to add in to leave our listeners with, or anything like where can people find you on YouTube, and you want to share your socials?
Yeah, Theodora, thank you. You're so good at what you do, and I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I know how that traumatic event when you were a child impressed upon you and gave you now this passion that you have for justice and for this to never happen to people. And now, especially as it's happened to you in family court. What a bunch of crap. But I support you too in your effort. And I think expose is the motto that I learned on social media on my Facebook page in 2010 after the police disabled me and beat me up, and I've been known as Criminal Bagnashi ever since. You know, it's crazy. Over 14 years of ongoing malicious prosecution, and they have one breach of peace guilty verdict. You know, what a bad guy.
Meanwhile,
You know how many women-
this
Huh?
lady in Waterbury who imprisoned her stepson for 20 years is walking free with a bracelet, and they let out a cannibal and
Yeah.
another guy who hacked somebody with a machete or something. They're walking free, but you're a criminal, right?
Well, Theodora, I followed since I became Criminal Bagnashi. I started following police blotters and everything else, and I'm like, wow, how come that guy got off? You know, walked away from all these charges. And
Yeah. How come they
the
didn't
Torrington
post his? How come there's no press release and no mugshot, but then they strategically post it about my arrest?
Right. They started targeting me in 2010 when I gave the lawful notification letter of intent to sue. And they retaliated with lawfare, weaponization of police and judicial branch ever since. And the thing is internet search my name. I mean, I'm taking the dogs for a walk. I was, you know, $10,000 bond, $50,000 bond, 5,000 cash only, 4,000 cash only. And in the articles that continue to slander and libel and character assassinate me, it's all lies. And I don't have any law enforcement in the country to go to. Even sheriffs in Utah, I tried to get involved in this because it followed me out there. The gang stalking and mobbing and you know, relentless retaliation, evictions out of Connecticut and Utah after they stole my home. They want me to be homeless and disenfranchised because then I can't fight back, you know. But that's not my style. But I'm on Facebook, Mary Bagnashi. I have a YouTube channel that's called Mary Bagnashi, and We the People is another one of my YouTube channels. So they can find me. Or internet search my name and find out some of these cases that are out there on me, and then ask questions. Get in touch with me if you want to know anything. And we got to unite, Theodora. And this is what's happening. I'm going to send you a link to the toll and roll group. That's you could get involved in that, and they are providing a avenue for remedy for all of us, including you in this situation that you're in, not just the home foreclosure and home mortgage fraud. It's a lot bigger than that, this toll and roll. I'll send you a link, and we got to try to get that out to the people and make it as known as possible, you know, what they're doing to people. But I'd really love talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. And I know sometimes it's not easy to talk about it, and so thank you for that. And I would encourage anybody else who is in Connecticut or even in other states who might have a similar story like Mary's to reach out to her, connect with her, and, you know, that if people are going through the same thing, they can share evidence, they can show each other similarities and find connections that maybe they overlooked, and with lawyers and certain people and stuff like that. So I would encourage anybody to reach out to you on social media if they want to connect, and just keep
Thank
speaking
you.
up, keep, yeah, definitely. And
Hugs,
stay
really.
strong.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're sweet, Theodora. Really, I feel so bad, especially when the children are involved. It's
So,
it's too much, but you're gonna make it because you're a smart and very strong, talented woman too. So good for you
thank you.
that you're doing this. All right, thanks.
And I'm rooting for you. So, just keep doing what you're doing, and don't let
Okay.
these people walk all over you, because we have rights and it's up to us to stand on them.
That's right. Amen. That's right. Okay, so take care.
You
Bye.
too. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a good day. Bye.
You too.